we broke for lunch. I was in a conversation over here trying to define this new kind of entity. It isn't a, and we were talking about it just before we broke, this notion that an entity could be could be structured as a corporation, could be a network which is completely empowered and enabled by its users, recognize the value in the users, serve the users in a way, but do it sustainably with a set of economics that supports that network, so it has that characteristic that looks a little bit like a business, but be driven by a set of values that are at least more comprehensive and complex than maximizing profit. And so we have a couple of people here who have built organizations like that, and maybe I could ask each of them to talk just for a second about why they made the choices that they made. And Yancey, could I start with you?
Sure. I guess one of the fundamental inspirations behind Kickstarter is that for the past 100 years, the kinds of ideas that have managed to flourish in our society and really to find funding have been ones that have the capacity to generate money. The primary way things have been funded for the past 100 years has been through investment, and so you're looking for things that are a good bet to produce revenue and to produce a return. That's a very limited scope of ideas. It's 0.001%, and many ideas have no notions of generating any money at all. They're just something that someone wants to see exist in the world, and they want a satisfaction of that. But we had a financial system that didn't account for that, and instead people were left with either debt, rich parents, or grant applications, maybe something along those lines. And so, what I think is most disruptive about Kickstarter isn't the participation of the crowd, although that's obviously a huge part of it. It's actually changing the fundamental question behind funding from will this produce revenue? Is this a good investment? To simply, do I want this to exist? And that creates a significantly lower bar that allows a lot more things to have the opportunity to come to life. So I see that as being really important. And the other thing I would add, just for our sake, is the projects that are going through Kickstarter have a very long creative life, and the funding is just one moment of them. They also are distributed and they're produced and all these other kinds of things. And we think it's really important as a business to focus on something that is just very specific. We don't want to be monolithic. We don't want to try to do everything because we wouldn't know how to. Instead, we're trying to precisely define one mission and one thing that we think we can do, and ignoring the rest and allowing for an ecosystem to develop to take that place. And that's a choice made because it's sustainable, because it seems more fun, because it's what we're interested in.
But it also defines your brand in a way, the things you choose not to do. And you've chosen not to do crowdfunding of for-profit startups.
Right.
You've chosen not to do things that are like funding an organization or something. You're funding projects, and so by defining what you don't do, you've defined more clearly what the brand stands for, why people should bring their projects to Kickstarter, and why funders should come to Kickstarter, what they should expect to find there.
Yeah, saying no is really important. Saying no has almost always been the right decision for us. We don't allow advertising on Kickstarter. We don't allow brands to sponsor projects. When a major brand reaches out saying we want to put a bunch of money into a bunch of things, we say you can sign up for an account like anybody else, and you can back a project. And someone get an email saying Coca-Cola pledged $20 to your project if Coke wants to do that. But obviously that is not why they want to do that. They want to do that for their own leverage. So we like the idea of a space that is us. I've used that word us before, but it's just all us. It's just everyone is the audience. And so I think that there's something really powerful about that, and it brings with it a sense of trust and maybe an understanding that we are steering where this goes. And so everything that happens is self-determined by everybody.
You bring up a very interesting notion in that I think I've heard, at least seen in a number of other peer networks, and that is everyone in the network is a peer, including the most powerful corporations. They can come into the network. There's nothing that prevents them from being in the network, but they have no better access to resources or followers or supporters than anybody else. Tumblr has taken the same approach. They've invited corporations to participate in Tumblr, but they have to create a Tumblr log, and it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah, Twitter did the same thing, largely accidentally, because when they got started, they had no notion of a fan page or a corporate page or anything like that. And so companies that wanted to engage in Twitter had to open up a Twitter account just like anybody else. And now they've made some, unlike Kickstarter, they have made some, concessions, if you will. The concept of a verified account is a concession, and the ability to have, they've created some power tools that let, let 10 people tweet under the @Coke handle. And those may or may not be healthy, actually, but that idea that everybody's a peer in the system probably is something that's fundamental to what a peer network is.
But we're also, note that we're back to the leader-founder thing, because they're not peers in the sense that some of those peers probably wanted to fund their startup. Mm-hmm. And the founders set the scope of the project, right? And limited that. So there is an interesting kind of command structure that's inside of this beautiful, and I think it was a wonderful thing that you guys did, but that whatever you're doing in limiting the range of it is one example of a center being a little bit stronger.
Anything because you said no a lot. Did you say yes to anything?
No. I mean, I think that
It's thousands of projects.
Yeah, I mean, we take a very broad. We have determined our mission to be supporting creative projects, furthering the creative works. Those are very nebulous phrases, obviously, and can be defined a lot of ways. We try to take the broadest definition as we can that does fit with. There is a sense of values that begin. So we like things that are done due to creative expression or some sort of personal fulfillment. I think are always great motivators, whereas maximization or commercial interests, I think, are less so. So there's an implicit ideology in how we structured it, and certainly we are an idealistic group of people, and I think that in some ways that comes through. But in the end, we've created a space, and we're inviting people to come in and use it, but we don't want to have much more to say beyond that. Just what are the basic
that notion of creating a space and creating sort of the laws of physics within that space, which then creates a set of outcomes that you don't control, but that is a kind of founding principle and gives you that. Let's move to Alexis. Yep, sure.
One of the things that seems to me that you've done at Kickstarter is that you made the rules explicit, and so therefore the decision making is no longer sort of hidden inside the organization. The decision making is basically public beforehand, and you tune. The decisions you're making are perhaps you'll tune the architecture a little bit, but then you publish it. Versus say a business that is making its product plans in secret, say a la Apple.
So we're adding principles here. There's this principle of everyone's a peer, and you just added a principle of transparency, which does seem to be a characteristic of these healthier peer networks.
Yeah.
Clay.
There's also, Kickstarter does an amazing job of providing information to the users of the system who are the front end, the sort of dashboard. A student of mine, Fred Benenson, is one of the early employees and now spends a lot of his time just with R, literally trying to understand what are the internal dynamics. But instead of saying, once we know the internal dynamics, we can game our user base, they say, once we understand the internal dynamics, we can educate our user base. Etsy does this around teams as well. You're in the business of making your own customers smarter. Contrast a bank or an airline.
Or a wireless carrier.
Or a wireless carrier, right. All of the confusopoly businesses are in the opposite business of the business Kickstarter.
So there's an empowerment versus control principle there as well.